Damir, how did you first learn about headless commerce?
So, Brian, as you know, we're big believers in e-commerce at Index. We've backed some of the largest marketplaces out there, like Etsy and Farfetch, and we've now shifted a bunch of our attention to trying to understand how brands are building their stores and their online presences. So, we've been digging into the software stack for e-commerce more broadly, and are trying to figure out how to enable merchants with powerful capabilities. So this is a good segue into some of the efforts that we've been undertaking over the past few years. Um, One of those efforts was to understand how can e-commerce merchants be as successful as possible, and part of that is how can they monetize their customer relationships as well as possible, which led us to the founder of Recharge, Asheen, who you know well. For those unfamiliar, Recharge is a product that allows merchants to set up subscriptions or other forms of recurring transactions for their products and has become one of the more popular apps in the Shopify ecosystem. And Asheen was really the first person to make me understand how important headless was becoming. He introduced me to a few of his large merchants who had been using Recharge's API and who were shifting to a fully API driven stack. And when I spoke to some of those merchants, I started to understand what kind of a lift they were seeing by moving towards headless and unlocking fast site speed and performance. The conversion rate improvement alone was really staggering to hear about. Um, but the big challenge that I was coming across in talking to these merchants was the actual implementation of headless. It sounded incredibly complex to make all of the app integrations work. Integrating with Shopify's cart and checkout was non-trivial. So we were always trying to keep an eye out for the company or the founder who was going to solve some of those challenges around actually executing on a headless build. And that's when we were lucky to find you, Brian.
It's honored. So, and I do think Oshin's product is phenomenal. In part because it's API centric, it's API first, and I don't think anyone would argue if you called the API headless, right? So it certainly brings up this question of what headless is and why it's important. But this idea of performance and page load speed, definitely a recurring theme that we see. Um, what's always interesting to me though, Demir, is just because there's a lot of good ideas out there doesn't mean that investors will actually invest. Any side notes on why this was something really worth putting Index's money behind?
For sure. I think so. We were originally introduced via Isheen at the Recharge Developer Day, and I was immediately taken by you, frankly, Brian. I think one thing that really stuck out about Nacelle from the start was how much domain expertise there was on the team. You and several of the folks on your team have been involved in the Shopify ecosystem from the early days. So you were working closely with merchants and understanding how their needs were evolving and what pain points they were seeing. So as an investor, I'd say that's one of the most important things we look for is the person that's starting the company really committed to the cause? Have they demonstrated that with what they were working on previously? And then do they have a really sharp point of view on what needs to be built to make their customer more successful in the future? And I think that was immediately clear from our first conversations. And I think it remains true to this day.
Thank you. It's an honor. Um, I think that building something, especially in a world where the technology is so new and almost constantly changing, for me, the vision of headless was one that always put the merchant choices first. And then with that came this obvious boost to the customer shopping experience. And to me, I think that's what headless is really about. Give the merchants option and choice, let them use the systems they already have in place, but then leverage, maybe some supplemental technology like Nacelle to actually maximize the customer shopping experience. And I think that's really home base for what we do over here.
Maybe a question for you, Brian, but did you have an epiphany moment that made you want to go all in on headless? Just curious if you could describe that.
I had an agency prior to building Nacelle, and we kept getting customer inquiries or client inquiries, if you will, around, hey, we have this page load speed problem, and that's playing in combination with we're getting more and more traffic on mobile. And page load speed is frustrating on a desktop, but when you're on a mobile phone, it's infuriating. How can we solve that problem? And I think, we went through this journey of trying different things on the front end, bringing in new technology like Gatsby and Next and Nuxt. And what we realized is there was actually a subtle gap, well, a pretty big gap between, just sending data from, say, a Shopify and a Contentful directly to a front end framework and the meat that goes in between, the backend systems that actually facilitate that flow. And to really get it to scale and to really do it properly, you needed to build a very robust connector system, and that was very much the birth of Nacelle. Yeah.
Such an amazing story.